Welcome, everyone, and thank you for being here today. I am, thank you for making this trip to Vienna. Some people had a long, a long way to come here. My name is Derenne. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the Vienna Institute for Archaeological Science. I arrived in Vienna last year to join the SEASCAPES project that I will tell you a little bit more about later on in this presentation. My path started in Belgium, where I did a Bachelor of Arts. I then moved to Switzerland, where I did a Master of Science and a PhD in prehistoric archaeology, where I specialized in bell beakers and more specifically, it's not presenting the correct one. So where I specialize on bell beakers and specifically pottery analysis. So after arriving in Vienna a few months later, I met Karina. If this is, oh, it's not advancing. Yes. In Hallstatt, of all places. And Katie. And Karina was there under this little white tent where she was presenting the work that she is doing with her colleagues and collaborators here at the museum, presenting her research on textiles, prehistoric textiles. And we had a long chat talking about her work, my work on bell beakers. And that's when I told her, you know, there's been this talk regularly about bell beakers and their ties to textiles, but not much has been done on the topic. Not much has been published too. And she said, well, you know what, let's organize a workshop on this. And 6 months later, here we are. And this is also, she already mentioned this, but thanks to the support of the Natural History Museum of Vienna and of the Human Evolution and Archaeological Science Network that made this day possible and for all of you to be here. So today we are bringing together two distinct scientific communities. Okay. And so I apologize in advance to my beaker colleagues, but I will do a little recap on the bell beaker phenomenon and explain a little bit what it's all about. Karina will do exactly the same for us textile newbies this afternoon. So without further ado, I'll start by presenting this. So when we talk of the bell beaker phenomenon, it's interesting to look at terminology. And as you can see, depending on the language, but also sometimes in the same language, we have a bit of variety from bell beaker phenomenon, civilization, bell beaker culture, bell beaker question, bell beaker problem, sometimes bell beaker people. And this is revealing of the kind of lack of consensus or difficulty there is to really define this phenomenon that we are observing in the field. But if I start with the basics, we have the material culture that has been used mainly to identify this phenomenon in the field is the so-called bell beaker package or bell beaker set that I put a simplified representation of here. It usually includes a bell-shaped decorated beaker. Here you see the maritime or so-called international standard, copper weapons, archery-related artifacts, such as this stone wrist guard that you can see, a little rectangular element. And then we have also personal ornaments, such as a V-perforated button. There's already a bit of variability in this material culture. I've given here two examples from Spain of this bell beaker set, and you can already see we have a little bit of difference even in the pottery styles, the types of objects, slight variations. It is mostly found in funerary contexts, from the single graves of Central Europe to the megalithic or collective graves of Western and Mediterranean Europe, but also in settlements. Here, this is a beautiful example, the site of Zambujal, a fortified settlement in Portugal that I had the chance to visit with Dr. Michael Kunst, who is present with us today, but also in less impressive settlements, small open-air sites, So also quite a bit of variability. So one element that is, I think, source of consensus in the beaker community is this large geographic distribution from Northern Africa to Poland and from Scotland all the way to Sicily. Quite a large distribution. And this comes hand in hand with, as I already touched upon, an integration into really varied cultural backgrounds with different burial rites, but also subsistence strategies, settlement patterns, and climates, and I could go on. There's also something that seems to appear, and it is that the phenomenon followed an arhythmic development, which means that depending on the region, it got integrated into late Neolithic contexts, Chalcolithic contexts, early Bronze Age contexts, and in some cases, several of those, or even all three. It is also proposed in many regions that this phenomenon has followed a development into phases. Here on the right is a very famous example for the Dutch beaker phenomenon, but this is also something that we observe in Portugal, in Spain, in France as well. So we have an initial phase with some specific styles that are more international, and then a regionalization and acculturation, one could say, and the development of local styles. The main questions that surround the phenomenon, I think, can be summed up into two categories: the question of origins and the question of the nature. Regarding the birthplace or birthplaces of this phenomenon, there have been many propositions over the years. And these questions, I think, have been troubling archaeologists for well over 200 years. There have been a proposition of an emergence in southern Spain, but also in Portugal, Central Europe, the Lower Rhine Valley, the Netherlands. And I think part of this is why I added this bonus question. Part of the issue here is that it's difficult to determine what exactly we should track the emergence of. So this comes down to the question, what truly marks the advent of this phenomenon? Is it the beaker? If so, the answer, or the follow-up question is, which type? We have this maritime style that I showed you, but we also have the all-over corded style, more typical of Northern and Central Europe, and that seem to have followed the corded ware culture. And this is also a contendant. So then is it the package itself, so the presence of this unit of artifacts together? Is it something else? And regarding the nature, there have been also many propositions and theories, from migrating people that diffuse their material culture throughout Europe, to propositions of economic networks, so explaining this diffusion of artifacts through trade and exchanges of goods. But also some people proposed the existence of a European elite of archer warriors, maybe sometimes a combination of these. Oh, no. Yes. And I would say some people even went further in saying, well, do we really have a homogeneous phenomenon? Can we really talk of a Bell Beaker phenomenon? So already I mentioned this question of phases and evolution through time. And some people have said, well, maybe the true actual phenomenon is this initial phase, and everything that follows is no longer that, because we cannot be sure that people attributed the same meaning to that because it got regionalized. And some people said, well, maybe from the very start, because of this huge, this really large geographic distribution, we can't say that there was a unique meaning between this, between these areas for this set of objects. Some of the models that tried to really come up with a solution to explain this diversity have been mostly those that propose partially superimposed networks or social worlds. explaining, for example, one network for one specific style of pottery and its diffusion, and another network with another direction of diffusion for another style. But there's one model in particular that I wanted to come back to today, and it is Zangmeister's Rückstrom or reflux model. This is the one that really tried to accommodate sometimes these seemingly contradictory elements that were found in the field. And this proposes the emergence of the maritime beaker in Iberia with a diffusion along the Atlantic facade towards North and Central Europe. And then there, an amalgamation with corded ware that led to the development of the all-over corded, and then a reflux towards Western and Mediterranean Europe, fueled with other elements typical of the Central European single grave cultures. This model was not contradicted by ADNA studies, which identified clear population movement along the Atlantic facade, including towards Ireland and Britain, but also the presence of steppe-related ancestry in Iberia by 2000 BCE. I would argue, though, that this model is also not contradicting a reversed version of this model. So yeah, the ADNA's results are not contradicting an opposite version of first an influx from the east and then a return towards the east from the Iberian Peninsula. And I think you're slowly starting to get where I'm headed to here, and it is that the true linchpin is absolute chronology, because in the current state of research, it's impossible to validate or invalidate most of these hypotheses and theories due to the lack of chronological resolution. And how is that? Well, we are facing what I would call an unfortunate combination of circumstances. The first one being the so-called plateau in the calibration curve, which is definitely not helping, but also the fact that a lot of these dates have really big error margins, and also that a huge set of these radiocarbon dates are actually at risk of being artificially pushed back a few centuries earlier because of potential old wood effect. A lot of these were made on unidentified charcoal samples, so it's hard to make that call. And finally, there's also the question of, in some cases, of a level of association with Bell Beaker material that is difficult to assess. And so for some radiocarbon dates, one can have reasonable doubt as to whether or not they were actually truly associated with beaker material. I wanted to give you a few examples. So I just, I looked at some of the oldest radiocarbon dates I could find from 4 different areas. We have Spain, Portugal, Southern France, and the Netherlands. This is just an example. I'm sure I could find old dates in other areas as well, but you can already see to the right part of the problem. We have a huge range for these dates calibrated at 2 sigma. And when we look at them, this is what is happening. So these are the 4 radiocarbon dates. And you can see that all 4 of those can correspond to a moment in time set at around 2850 cal BC, but they can also all correspond to 2650 cal BC. So we have a double problem. First of all, we can't decide between these 4 regions which is the actual oldest or earliest beaker date. But then we also have a problem of identification of when exactly is this phenomenon starting. We have 200 years here. So this is why in the current state of research, it's really complicated to answer some of these questions that I've presented. And this is when I get to talk to you about SEASCAPES. So SEASCAPES, the project I'm working on here in Vienna, has a Mediterranean focus on this issue. And the idea is to refine the absolute chronological network in the Western Mediterranean, really focusing mostly on coastal areas and islands. And there are 4 working packages in this project. The first is the collection and evaluation of published radiocarbon dates, then also of pottery styles, and finally of the elements of the beaker package. Then we have a big radiocarbon dating program that will hopefully bring over 300 high quality new radiocarbon dates to this map. Then we also have an entire dietary part of this project through the analysis of pottery absorbed fatty acids, so lipid analysis. And this can also yield some radiocarbon dates thanks to CSRA. And finally, we have a modeling part, first at a site level, so Bayesian modeling to reduce the span of these radiocarbon dates as much as possible, and then spatio-temporal modeling at the scale of the Western Mediterranean to try and observe these connections and hopefully identify also direction of movement. This project was developed and is being led by Associate Professor Maria Ivanova-Bieg, who is there. Maria, raise your hand. And Associate Professor Lucy Crump. Maria is here at the University of Vienna at the Vienna Institute for Archaeological Science, and Lucy is at the University of Bristol. We also have 3 other co-project members. Dr. Alex Bayliss at Historic England, who is our Bayesian and radiocarbon specialist, and Professor Mark Thomas and Adrian Timpson at UCL, who are going to do the modeling with us. But I wanted to say that absolute chronology, even though it's really important, is only one facet of what we need to investigate in order to really understand this phenomenon. And so I've only listed a few elements here. There's so much more that needs investigating, but all of that combined will allow us to delve deeper and really understand these complex mechanisms that are very likely at play. And understand this this development, this diffusion of the beaker package or beaker phenomenon. I wanted to give a shout out to a few recent studies. This is not at all exhaustive, but also to give you an idea of the topics that have been investigated in the last few years, from an archaeological study of bell beaker arches from Central Europe to a network analysis in southern France, pottery opératoire in the Alpine area, material culture analysis of archery and warfare related artifacts, and also ADNA and isotopic studies focusing on kinship and residency pattern in southern Germany. And we will have amazing other examples presented later today, so I'm really looking forward for you to discover those. If I can just pinpoint one thing, is that these are either at a local scale and or have a very specific focus, and I think that's the key. That's also one of the main things for this phenomenon. We need to first go local before we go global, so to speak, or at the scale of the continent. So the facet we are investigating today is that of bell beaker motifs and their relationship to textiles. And as I said, this is something that has been talked about regularly, mentioned in conferences, maybe sometimes presented a little bit, but there have not been much published on this topic. And so when someone is interested in this, there's not much to find also. And this is why I'm so excited that we managed to organize this workshop and get you all here. I think it will make for great discussions. We are extremely lucky to have speakers coming from all corners of Europe today, which means that they are bringing an expertise that is sometimes more localized, sometimes on very specific themes. We also have people on the whole spectrum of their careers, so to speak. We have first-time presenters today, like early career researchers, and we have seasoned researchers who have dedicated most of their life to researching the phenomenon or archaeological textiles. And also, I should mention, we have here a variety of professions as well. And I think that's really important. This is why this is a workshop and less than a conference, so to speak. So we have people, we have conservation professionals here at the museum. We have people working on the field, working in heritage preservation institutions, research institutions and universities. But we also have artisans experimenting with material and techniques. And we even have people that work specifically to disseminate archaeological knowledge to the general public. So we are really combining here a lot of different experiences. And yes, I can only just say, I hope we will all enjoy this day and explore what can be said on this topic. So without further ado, I will present our next speaker. I will just maybe remind you of something that Karina already said, but we have extremely short discussion slots. But this is because we really want these discussions happening either during the breaks or this afternoon during the hands-on session. So if you have large, big questions, complex questions, you can always find the speaker at the next break.